Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. This afternoon, after a full day of conversations with Republican members, and I'm sure across the country, a lot of people talking about what the Rules Committee did last night and how we're going to approach the issue of the disapproval of the president's Iranian deal. There was a lot of discussion, and first I'd like to say that H.Res. 411 would find that the president has not complied with the requirements of Section 2 of the Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, which passed Congress and became law in May. Big discussions about this, and big discussions about whether the law required the president to transmit all of the nuclear deal items to, as it deals with the Iranians, to Congress. There's a belief that this has not been done, and thus the part of the agreement has not been met. Second, H.R. 3460 would suspend the authority of the administration to waive, suspend, reduce, or provide relief from the application of sanctions on Iran pursuant to its agreement regarding the Iranian nuclear program. Put simply, this would stop the administration from lifting sanctions personally put on Iran. Third, this new resolution, H.R. 3461, would allow for a vote to approve the deal the administration made with Iran regarding this nuclear program. While previous legislation would have allowed Congress to disapprove the deal, this legislation would not allow the deal to go forward without congressional approval. We have a lot of items to discuss tonight. We've got two members of Congress who have, by and large, taken their time to make their thoughts and ideas known about this important issue, and they're here with us tonight. Mike Pompeo and my very, very dear friend Peter Roskam. Both these members have taken a lot of time, tried to work through their ideas, and they're going to get a chance to be at the Rules Committee. In just a minute, I'm going to ask both of them if they would please come and be a part of our witness table. But before I do that, the gentlewoman from New York would have time for an opening statement. The gentlewoman's recognized.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very important that that we have an opportunity to do this because, as all of you deliberated all day, as you know, the Democrat Party was left out of all this totally. I thank the chairman for yielding me the time. The vote on the Iran nuclear agreement has been touted by the majority as the most consequential vote of our careers, maybe even of our lifetime. And we've had months of consideration, hearings, questions, open debate, following rules sometimes of the customs of the House. Today, I met with the ambassadors from the P5+1 countries, our negotiating partners. They have a unified voice. They embrace the Iran agreement for the incredible achievement it is. Yesterday, we had a hearing in this room that lasted for 4 hours. We had testimony from chairs and ranking members of the relevant committees. We had a robust discussion and a healthy back and forth. We prepared for the rule debate. We went home about 8 p.m. 12 hours later, the dissident wing of the majority party emerged from their neighborhood Tortilla Coast basement where they were meeting with a different path in mind and rendered all of our work moot. Instead of regular order and a perversion of our legislative process, we are yet again thrown into chaos by a majority chasing its tail in a last-minute meeting, throwing together 3 bills that might as well have been scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. The bills before us have trivialized our institution. They have been whipped up in an afternoon to mollify the disgruntled wing of the majority's party that has no intent of actually governing. Their only goal with this trio of bills is to feed the monster seething within their own ranks. Meanwhile, the Senate has declared that they are not changing course, and in the end, we will be left with nothing. The 60 days of improving or whatever you want to do with this agreement ends next Thursday. There's been no committee action on the 3 bills. Well, actually, there wasn't for what we did last night either. No debate and no time to consider it. Mr. Royce in his testimony never mentioned any of this. Why? Because he didn't know anything about it. Why didn't we hear about them? because they didn't even exist yesterday. Instead of addressing an issue of international global importance, we're occupied with the Republican conference's internal politics, and it is an embarrassment. This dog and pony show has turned our Congress into a stage to play out their internal drama that is leaving us a laughingstock. If the majority cannot devise a process on a measure that they agree unanimously on, they're going to have a unanimous vote on it, but they can't even pass a rule to do it, I shudder to think what's coming in Act Two. And Act Two is rushing toward us. We are days from a government shutdown. We are days from the Federal Aviation Administration authorization expiring, which would ground all flights in the United States and cripple this economy. The funding for the Perkins loan for low-income college students at the beginning of this college year will dry up. But here we are on the third floor of the Capitol, forced to make it look legitimate to be here because none of us have had any say in any of this, to join in yet another pointless exercise because the Senate will not take up these bills. What I ask is the purpose of this charade. To quote Mr. Joseph Welch before Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1954, quote, "You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency at long last?" End quote. I yield back my time.
And thank you very much. I would offer to and hasten to add a little bit to that, but I would say that in this House, we are trying our darndest, our very best, not only to listen to our members.
To your members, not to the rest of us. We'd be happy to help you with all these things. We were elected to do that.
And we will continue to try and not only listen to our members, but make wise and appropriate choices. One of the things which the gentlewoman did allude to, which has thrown a monkey wrench in our agenda, is an announcement by the Senate that they simply don't want to vote on the bill. And it's most discouraging. Republicans believe several things. First of all, we try and read the bills, pass them. But secondly, we came here to make tough decisions and would be willing to vote on things, even when they're tough. And I think that what the Senate is doing, if they choose to do that, is doing the same process that the American people said to the Senate when we gained net 9 seats, Republicans. We're sick and tired of people skipping out of making tough decisions. So that's just my take on it. I'm not trying to add any incendiary wood to the fire, but this has had a lot to do with why we have gone back and rethought, reshuffled, re-listened, recalculated from last night. Thank you very much. I want to, gentleman from Massachusetts, gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Jim, you had asked for time?
No, why don't you go first?
No, I just wanted to ask a question. Is it correct that the Senate did have unanimous consent to approve the rule that we passed out of the Rules Committee last night, disapproving? Am I correct in that assertion?
Boy, I'll tell you, I don't even know how to begin to answer that. Did this? Okay. If you can ask the question again, we can work it through, but I don't know how to answer that. Did the Senate?
This place is rife with rumor, but among the things that I heard today was that the Senate had sought and obtained unanimous consent to go forward on the measure that we undertook last night in the Rules Committee.
I just can't address it. I don't know. I don't know. But I thank the gentleman for asking the question. I'll try and answer what I can. Mr. McGovern.
I just have a technical question.
Yes, sir.
Before the gentleman testify here. We got 3 different bills here. Who are the authors of the bills? I'm looking on the, it doesn't indicate who the author of.
We're going to have the authors of the bill with us in just a minute.
So Mr. Pompeo, Mr. Roskam, they're the authors of all 3 bills? Is that how they'll be introduced, or?
They're actually, it is a bill that has 3 sections.
No,
And the third one
Three
is
bills.
3 bills, I
the
think you have.
speaker.
Each has a number.
Yeah.
And the third one is the speaker. So I believe these gentlemen, and then the speaker.
So Mr. Pompeo and Roscom are authors of H.Res. 411 and H.R. 3460, and then Speaker Boehner is the author of H.R. 3461?
My understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Thank you very much. Mr. Pompeo, Mr. Roscom, I want to make sure both of you are here. I know both of you, Mr. Pompeo, I know you've been up here before. Mr. Roscom, I don't know. You think? Oh, I think you are too. That's what I think too. I think you are too. So here's what happens up here. We're counting on both of you to do your very best. We'd like for you to turn on when it's your time, and I'm going to come to you first, Mr. Roscom. We're going to have you turn on that microphone and make sure you speak into it. You're going to have to stick around here till I excuse you. So you're not going to be able to get up and walk away. You need to go to the bathroom, I'm sure you'll signal me, right? And if you want something to drink, just let me know. Got some water or Coke around here. But we're here to hear from you, and you're going to have to take our questions. That's about how we work around here, and the rest of it is, if Louise asks a question, just get ready. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered the record. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter, and all the members of the committee. I appreciate the work that you do and the difficulty and the duress under which this committee works. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your consideration. I'm here to present to you H.R. 3460 for your consideration, which is fairly straightforward and should give you a sense of ease in that it doesn't contemplate any change in the law. In other words, it says simply that the president is denied the ability to change current law. Chairman Sessions articulated it well, and I can conclude very, very quickly and then yield to any questions that you have. It simply suspends the authority of the president to waive, suspend, reduce, provide relief from, or otherwise limit the application of sanctions pursuant to an agreement related to the nuclear program with Iran. It's a bill of 3 pages. It's very straightforward, and I'm happy to yield to any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pompeo, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Slaughter, as well. I'm here to talk about House Resolution 411 tonight. It's pretty straightforward as well. For the record, I haven't been to Tortilla Coast in months. I bet they do. Very, very straightforward. It's a simple idea, which says that under Corker-Cardin, there was a commitment on behalf of the president that was made in exchange. There was an arrangement that was agreed to by both houses of Congress and the president. And it said simply this: we will treat this bill under this provision. It won't be a treaty. We'll deal with it in this manner. And in exchange for that, the president will allow us to read the entire deal. Seems pretty straightforward and unobjectionable. It turns out the president has not complied with that. I traveled with Senator Cotton to Vienna. We learned that there were 2 agreements, which, to the best of my knowledge, no American has read the final versions of those agreements in their entirety. I know that I have not been able to read them, and I don't believe any member of Congress has been able to read them. And therefore, Corker-Cardin has not been complied with by the president, and that's what this resolution says. It says the president has failed to deliver this agreement in its entirety to the United States Congress, and then resolves that as a result of that failure, of course, the timing for consideration of a disapproval motion under Corker-Cardin has not yet commenced. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I expect that nearly everyone will acknowledge that they've not read this agreement in its entirety, and that there'll be a big, large vote on behalf of this resolution tomorrow. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The measure that's before us tonight, Mr. Pompeo, takes the issue that you, as you have just stated, that you believe that the law that was passed, known as what we might call Corker, required for all, and I'm not quoting all relevant or all information, I'm sure you have those words, but you believe that the compliance with the law has not been made And so your view is that the time frame the clock has not started. Is that your argument?
That is correct. Section 135H1 defines the agreement. In fact, it talks about side agreements in particular, uses the term side agreements. And that those side agreements and their delivery to this body are a condition precedent to the other actions that are required to be taken under Corker-Carden, and they have not been completed.
Without too much challenge to you, was this an issue in any of the hearings that have been held or an acknowledgement by the administration? I see things, I don't know if they're clips, I don't know if they're cuts, I don't know if there's redaction. Has the Secretary of State been challenged on this matter in a hearing before the House or the Senate that you're aware of, sir?
Yes.
Could you please describe that interaction to the best of your knowledge as a witness that is before this committee?
It will, and we're in an unclassified setting, so I know at least a couple of instances where the administration has been asked in a classified setting, but I'll speak to what has taken place in an unclassified setting.
That would be correct.
There are at least 5 different answers that have been given by the administration with respect to the existence of the side agreements. It began with State Department saying that there are no side deals. That was Mr. Kirby. It was July 22nd. The exact quote was, there are no side deals between Iran and the IRA, that the P5+1 has not been briefed on in detail, and I think therein lies the rub, right? They caveated the existence of the agreements by saying there aren't any, but we've been briefed on them, an odd statement. On July 28th, Secretary Kerry testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee saying, I haven't seen it. On July 29th, Secretary Kerry testified before the Senate Armed Service Committee once again saying, I haven't read it. But that it's possible that Undersecretary Wendy Sherman may have read it. And then on July 30th, Undersecretary Sherman said, I saw pieces of paper but was not allowed to keep them. I personally have inquired of Secretary Kerry about whether he has a copy or the administration has a copy of these agreements, and was informed, this was in the congressional hearing that was held for all of us were available to attend, and he informed me that he did not have a copy of the agreement.
One more question. It's a supposition, perhaps. Do you believe one exists?
Yes. I believe there are 2 side agreements. I believe those documents exist. But it is the case that I have not seen those documents.
So it would be your belief that you being here tonight, that you believe that you have made an argument to today, at least in the conference and perhaps now publicly, that you believe the administration has not fulfilled the agreement as required by law.
That is correct.
Is there anything, Mr. Roscom, that you, sitting at the same table, would you concur with the gentleman? First of all, have you looked at this issue yourself and reviewed it?
I've looked at the issue myself and reviewed it. I've been in consultation with Mr. Pompeo. I've not had the discussion with Secretary Kerry personally that he's described, but I've seen a number of the same clips and assertions from the administration, but that's been the extent of my interaction on it.
Mr. Roscom, you are a lawyer. You have a legal background. You read words. You do thoughtful, artful things in your profession that include knowing what you're talking about before you say something. You're held accountable for your actions, not withstanding in front of a court, but the things that you have. I've always known you to be that way, as well as Mr. Pompeo. You are suggesting to me tonight that you believe you have done thoughtful analysis of this, and this is not a whim, this is not a political disagreement, it is simply the law. And you are giving testimony to this committee about the law and the non-compliance, and that's what you're asking the conference and this Rules Committee to consider this evening.
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. To Mr. Pompeo's bill specifically, the plain language of Corker-Carden explicitly discusses side deals, and that's a term that's been contemplated. And the notion that the Iranians have now come up with a negotiation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which the United States Congress has no knowledge of, means one thing to me. It means that the timing has not begun, the disclosure for timing has not begun, and that the clock has not yet begun as it relates to this matter. And the remedy is either stop the clock, in my view, or disclose the documents. But the public should not be rushed into voting on something when they don't have the benefit of the totality of the documents. And I think that's a plain reading of Corker-Cardin.
Mr. Roskin, what committees do you sit on in the United States Congress?
Ways and Means.
Mr. Pompeo?
I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I serve on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and I'm also a member of the Benghazi Select Committee.
I serve on the Benghazi Select Committee as well.
As the standing committees and the select committees. Is there your evaluation that by not meeting this, that you have asked for the appropriate people within Congress that might also be the Committee of Jurisdiction, the gentleman, Mr. Let's see, well, there are 5 committees that have jurisdiction. We have Judiciary that has some. We have Ways and Means that has some. We have Financial Services. We have Foreign Affairs, and we have Oversight. Thank you, Judge. Have you sought this question of compliance with those committees to ensure that they have not received information also?
My office has communicated with all of the chairman of all of those offices, and the representation to us is that none of them have received it.
Thank you very much. Well, I would consider that what you did today within the conference, where each of those chairmen were present, would have given them ample knowledge to try and provide that to you upon you seeking that. And I know you were on the floor of the House last night, I believe, or were supposed to be,
right,
where you were expressing this public opinion. Information that you're providing so that you would allow proper information if you had been incorrect.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I very much appreciate and respect our colleagues who are here tonight. I think they know that from my previous attitudes toward them, and I appreciate their coming here and bringing their testimony and bringing their bills. I want to thank them very much for their hard work, and also for their patriotism and concern about our country and the future of the country. So I basically want to express my appreciation, but I have no questions, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, gentleman. Yields back your time. The gentlewoman from New York, the ranking member, Ms. Slaughter, is recognized. The gentlewoman does not seek time. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
First, I want to join my colleagues, and I wasn't here, unfortunately, to hear your initial statements. I had a previous engagement and got here as quickly as I could. But do you think there's anything in any of the side agreements, and it'd be very speculative on your part, that would make you change your opinions about the agreement?
Well, I've got a low view of the opinion. I've got a low view of the agreement already.
And I just want to say I share your low view.
So
that's
but if
okay.
you look, Mr. Cole, to your point, there's been reports that there is an ability that the Iranians have negotiated, that they literally are able to make verifications by themselves. And I find that so absurd and so obtuse and so offensive, I can hardly characterize it beyond that. So that would be, I think, incredibly concerning to everybody, and it would be my hope that it would influence people that currently have a favorable view of the Iran nuclear deal.
And I asked the same question to you, Mr. Pompeo.
Yeah, it's hard to know without having seen them. But
I'd be pretty surprised if there's anything in them that would make you
it would be unlikely. Having said that, the agreements do contain, we know the subject matter, at least we've been told the subject matter of the two side agreements. One has to do with the inspection verification regime at Parchin, an important military industrial complex 20 miles southeast of Tehran. The second one has to do with the history of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, at least the militarization of that program, the so-called PMDs. Secretary Kerry reiterated multiple times how important it was that we understood the history of that program and then allowed this to be taken care of in an agreement that the Americans couldn't see, and everyone knows how important it is that we get access to the sites like Parchin so that we can actually do what the president wanted us, right? He said we can't trust, but we must verify, and these core verification provisions are unavailable to us and to the American public. So I suspect it's not likely I would change my vote, but I do think it's important, and Corker-Cardin so states.
So would it be fair, and I asked this question to both of you, so just please answer it in any order you care to. Would it be fair to say, honestly, your concern is to make sure people that have a different opinion about this agreement actually have all the information in front of them before they make a final judgment?
Yes, that's a fair characterization.
Yes, I agree.
Let me ask you this. I mean, I know our friends, and I do this mean sincerely, on the other side are concerned that, you know, the issues we're going to put before the Congress would, you know, perhaps preclude a vote on, you know, what was effectively the Corker-Cardin final deal. Is there anything, once we go through this exercise and make our opinion known here, because I think you both make a very good point. I mean, there's clearly important agreements that have been made that the American people ought to be aware of. Certainly the Congress ought to be aware of before it casts a vote. But is there anything that at a later point would preclude you from, you know, considering something like what we originally envisioned last night, which is, you know, a vote of disapproval or approval on the measure?
No, not as far as I'm concerned.
No, I agree. I'm hopeful that the documents will arrive.
So, assuming, I mean, on the basis of what you already know, I would assume you're both inclined to vote no or in support of a measure to disagree with accepting the treaty. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you're just trying to make sure, effectively, that every member of this body has all the information that's possible to have before they cast a vote.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think this is a particularly high standard, by the way. I think full disclosure, that's, you know, to Mr. Pompeo's point, full disclosure was contemplated in Corker-Cardin. And I think everybody, you know, regardless of our political background and philosophy, we all know and celebrate disclosure and just the ability to fully engage. And, you know, to echo something that Mrs. Slaughter said a moment ago, you know, all of us recognize the important nature of this debate that we're about to have. And so I think in this context in particular, full disclosure benefits everyone, and it certainly will benefit our members.
Mr. Pompeo?
We ought to do everything we can to ensure that both the Corker-Cardin is complied with and that everyone gets a chance to see. I mean, we have members demand to see the text of renamings of post offices, for goodness sake. This is a lot more important than that, and so we ought to see the text of this agreement as well, and to date, we've not been able to do that.
We had an extensive discussion last night as to whether or not these side agreements were relevant. And my friends on the other side offered a spirited defense that, hey, these agreements we're not normally allowed to see because they're, you know, between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the country in question. I made the point in response that could you trust the Iranians? Had they kept any of these agreements? And I think they have to be held to a higher standard here than what's normal. There's a big difference between dealing with a country like the United States, which, quite frankly, has not, you know, engaged in proliferation activity, has kept its agreements, and a country like Iran that we know has repeatedly violated these agreements. So given that, again, I want to ask you one more time. It will seem redundant, but I think it's an important point to be made. We ought to have every piece of information available, and I don't think the Iranians should be allowed to shield what they've stipulated to the International Atomic Energy Agency. As this is how we will quote effectively allow you to conduct your verification. That's an important piece of information for every member of the Congress to know before they cast a vote. So, you agree with that statement?
I do, Mr. Cole. I mean, to just highlight, my expectations based on past Iranian behavior, my expectations of the Iranians are very, very low. And I think it would be foolhardy, it would be naive, it would be presumptuous to think that somehow they're going to change their disposition as they're interacting with the IAEA, and that somehow these negotiations become more fruitful and hopeful. So I think it's incumbent upon us, for all the obvious reasons, to make sure that the Iranians fully disclose all their information.
I agree with that. I might just add, as you were talking about that, I was looking to see if there was an exception for the president's requirement to transmit documents for things that were unimportant, or things that didn't matter, or things that were insignificant, and I don't see that in the language of Corker-Cardin. And so, regardless of the nature of these side agreements, regardless of what's in them, however unimportant one might think they were, I don't, but if someone said, hey, these are unimportant, what the president signed was a requirement to transmit all of the language, and that's simply not been done.
In this, and I think you're, again, both to be commended, because I think your effort here is largely simply to make sure that each and every member of Congress, before they cast an incredibly consequential vote, have every bit of information before them. Given that, I want to ask you particularly, Mr. Pompeo, you've got an extraordinarily impressive background, frankly, in serving your country. Could you tell us a little bit about what you did before you were in Congress?
I'm not going to tell you everything.
I don't want anything that's classified.
No, I didn't mean that.
We're not asking the witness be under oath.
I appreciate that. So it's been a long time ago. I graduated from West Point in 1986 and then served in the Army on active duty for a little over 5 years.
Can you tell us where you graduated in your class at West Point?
I think the correct answer is I don't recall.
Probably is, but I think it was
number
1 or 2, wasn't it?
I was a very good student, it's
Yeah,
true.
you were a very good student.
And I had a great experience for serving with amazing soldiers at the end of the Cold War. And this debate reminds me very much of that, right? We went through these debates about treaties with the Russians for an awfully long time, the then Soviet Union. And we always did our best to make sure that we got the verification we needed, and we've had moderate success there. Unfortunately, in this case, we've got a deal that's not even to that level.
Well, we've been told, and I would ask you both to comment on this, that this is the strictest verification regime ever, that no other country has been subjected to this degree of scrutiny. No other agreement has been so carefully negotiated. And, well, I mean, do you accept that statement on behalf of the administration?
No,
I'll
I think
ask you,
that's I think it's an overcharacterization, and I think the proof of that is the time duration, for example, that the Iranians have. I had an interesting experience that I'd like to share with the committee just briefly. This is about 5 years ago. I was over in Israel and was interacting with a member of their intelligence community who said an interesting thing. He said, this is to try and understand the Iranians. He goes, go home on your printer and print out a thick red line on a white piece of paper and take a look at it from a distance, and it will look like one thick, solid line. But he goes, pull it up closely and look at it, and what you'll see are tiny little pink lines that are ever so close together. And what the Iranians have mastered, they have mastered the ability to break one tiny little pink line and then step back and see what happens. And then break another line and break another line. That's past practice. We know this. We know they lied about Parchin. We know they lied about past weaponization. We know they've been lying as it relates to funding for Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth. All of those things create an environment, it creates a disposition, and it informs us that we need to be especially careful. So I don't think that the rigor has been placed where it should be, and I do think that we need to do a much better job. Most of us, I think, across the aisle are very interested in reconciling our relationship with the Iranians. But this is not the format through which we should be moving.
Representative Cole, I don't agree that these are the most intrusive. There are places where these are very intrusive. There are elements of this agreement where there are good provisions there. What happened was we let the cat out of the bag. That is, we left a back door. And the back door has two access points. One of the secret side agreements. We don't know if one of those side agreements might begin with the following words. Notwithstanding everything else we've said so far, right? That is, we are reading this agreement in the context of not knowing precisely what has been let out of the bag in either of them. And the second one is this idea that these are time limited. And that's problematic with a systemic cheater like the Iranians. And so I don't think it's the case that we have a verification regime that matches the threat.
You know, and I made this point last night, but I'll make it again. We have a number of extremely talented members on the other side that are routinely supportive of the president. And I don't mean that in any disparaging way. I mean, they philosophically line up with the president, but they have serious doubts about this agreement. And I would posit that they run enormous risk right now. They really do politically. I'm very proud of people like Nita Lowey, the ranking member on appropriations, or Elliot Engel, the ranking member on foreign relations, and on the Senate side, obviously Senator Schumer, but Robert Menendez, who's a former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee as a Democrat, or the current ranking member, Ben Cardin. They clearly have serious doubts about this deal because they have risked serious political consequences for themselves, in my view, in making the judgment that just on the basis of what they've seen, not the things we haven't seen, just on what they've seen, they're extremely skeptical. That's a hard decision for them to make. It really is. I mean, I've been on the other side of this with President Bush, and when we were in the minority, and to do this. So, I think those people in particular deserve every opportunity to see what's in every aspect of this deal. And more profoundly than that, I think the American people deserve every opportunity to see what's in this deal. So what in the world could possibly be wrong with demanding that we see everything that's been written down? We're getting ready to make what the president, what people on both sides say this is the most consequential vote you're likely to cast in your career. What would be wrong with them having the opportunity to see everything? They might change their mind. I suspect they wouldn't, but they might, and they deserve. It's not just a question of, do Republicans deserve to know something? The American people deserve to know something. People on that are normally on the president's side of this debate deserve to know this. I mean, do you see what you're doing as something that, frankly, hopefully allows them the opportunity to see everything so they can make the fullest and best decision? Because they're making courageous decisions or difficult decisions right now.
Here's the remedy. The remedy is disclosure by the White House of these documents. The remedy is the ability of the White House to pursue these and to reveal them. And then the clock can tick, the timing starts, we can have a debate up or down, and it becomes clear, and everybody has the information. And we can have reasonable people can differ on these things, as we know, and people of good faith can differ on these things. But where we should be unified is around the idea of full disclosure and all the information so that reasonable people can come to the conclusions and reflect their constituencies.
Would my colleague from Oklahoma yield?
I certainly yield, my friend.
Yeah, I have signified that I'm against this agreement. Like Mr. Pompeo, who recently went to IAEA, I visited IAEA on more than one occasion during the period of time that Iran was alleging that their enrichment process was for peaceful purposes. And obviously, over the course of time, that proved to be incorrect. I'm comfortable with my decision largely for the reason that there are protocols and that allow for as many as 200 countries, probably less than that, maybe 180 countries, to have so-called safeguard agreements. This, I believe, would be the administration's argument, that the IAEA is the repository under those safeguard agreement protocols, and therefore, in this instance, it is the IAEA who will have the responsibility. And it seems to me that what happened during the course of the agreement, and I make no assertion of justification for the administration's process, but it would seem to me that what caused this annex to come into existence was the fact that Iran is going to be required under the agreement to provide to the IAEA what they did previous to the time of this agreement. What they did at Parshan, what they did at Combs, what they did at Fordo, who the scientists were.
Can I ask my friend a question quickly?
Yes.
Well, don't you think that since we're, our responsibility collectively, all of us, is to represent the American people, we should have that information as well before we cast a vote?
It seems logical, but then the 180 countries who had these kinds of agreements, for example, with Libya, Sweden, South Africa, all of these countries submitted to, and all of the signatories to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty gave forth information to the IAEA under the notion that it would be confidential. Otherwise, they may not, in some instances, have provided information. Now, look, I'm very clear about believing that Iran is totally untrustworthy. I have no question in my mind about that. But I came to my decision mindful that this IAEA protocol exists, and Mr. Pompey and Mr. Roscom are going to have at least an opportunity to present it, but I'm sure that there are going to be members on either side who may very well question whether or not this is going to be a breach, and should the administration be able to provide the information that the IAEA. Now, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you, my friend, what really bothered me was that however long the agreement was negotiated, it would seem to me that we could have waited for that report that the IAEA is going to undertake. I might add, it isn't due until later in the year. That's how the agreement speaks. But it would seem to me that then it would have been later in the year, so that IAEA would be on the spot by saying that they verify that Iran had complied with the particulars of the agreement. That's how I came to my decision.
Well, I have enormous respect for my friend and his opinion, and frankly, he's made a difficult decision. I recognize, I do. I just want to make sure that, which I think Mr. Roscoe and Mr. Pompeo are trying to do, that the American people have the same information available to them that the IAEA has, so they can make a decision. And I want that for my colleagues, which I don't care which side you are on the issue. I mean, I think what you're engaged here is an effort to make sure all the information is available to frankly, every member that has to cast a vote, because we all have to live with the vote that we cast, and that the American people who ultimately make the decision, also have that. Let me ask my friends this. Do you think the administration has full access to these side agreements that they've, I mean, I've been at the briefings where we've been told, by senior administration officials, we've been briefed about that. Well, it's great to be briefed. That's not the same thing as having the documents, having the material in front of you. And again, I know I cast no aspersions on anyone here. I really don't. But this is a consequential decision, and I want to see everything So do you think the administration has had the opportunity to see everything themselves? I mean, they signed off on this deal, they're for the deal, but do you believe they've had the opportunity, not to quote, be briefed, but to look at the documents themselves and come to a judgment themselves about whether or not the agreements between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Iranian regime are indeed appropriate, are thorough, are, cover everything, and if they don't, that would concern me a great deal.
No.
So,
No, I don't believe they've had the opportunity to read these and evaluate them.
And I think you're right, Mr. Pompeo. I mean, from what I've seen, the administration talks about being briefed, but they haven't seen these things. And to me, I would want the administration, which is making the final decision on the deal, to see every single thing, because as I think we agree probably on both sides of the aisle, we're not dealing with a trustworthy negotiating partner here. And I have no book against the International Atomic Energy Agency. But I want to see it. I want my commander-in-chief. I want my, Secretary of State. I want our military officials to see everything before they make a definitive agreement. And from what you're telling me, you don't think they've had that opportunity.
I agree with that. I think based on the characterizations, the sort of parsing, the inability to engage substantively on that discussion that we've heard from administration officials make it clear that at best they've been briefed by others who have claimed to see it, but it's quite obvious that they've not been briefed in a reasonable way, nor studied the documents in a way to make assertions.
So I want to end on this point. I've taken a lot of time. The chair, as always, has been very generous here. Your effort, in my view, is to make sure that every member of Congress and all the American public see all the relevant documents before we cast a vote. I'd like to respond to that point first. Second point I'd make, though, there's nothing here that, on the basis of what you know, I would presume you both would be comfortable at some point in the future after we've made this statement and made it clear to the American people, we're getting ready to make a decision where we have not seen all the relevant documents. We have not seen them. Our administration has not seen them. The people supportive of it have not seen them. The people opposed to it have not seen it. But given that, would you have any problem if at a later date we voted, a non-approval of the agreement? Just to me, I could vote non-approval just based on the fact I hadn't seen everything. I got to tell you, I could vote non-approval enthusiastically on the basis of what I've seen. I'm not sure I would see much that would change my mind, to be fair. But I want my friends, I want the administration, which is for this deal, and I want my friends who are going to vote in support of this deal to have the opportunity to have seen every single agreement that's been reached about this. Is that a fair statement about where you're at?
It is. My only reluctance, Mr. Cole, is moving forward within the context of Corker-Cardin. I misspoke. Is it? Yeah, Corker-Cardin. My C's, I'm sorry.
Mr. Roscoe, you very seldom misspeak. I've been here a long time.
IAEA and Corker-Cardin and all these things that sound alike. But my point is, in my opinion, the Pompeo language is essential to make the assertion that the House does not believe that the administration has complied with Corker-Cardin. That, I think, is a condition precedent for moving forward. Once that's met, and I hope that it is, by favorable reporting.
And is it fair to say, it's not only they haven't met the requirement, they themselves haven't seen this.
Right.
Really what you're trying to do is just say, we want you to make sure you've seen everything before you come out foursquare in support of this deal.
That's right.
That seems to me a pretty logical place to be. And I think the American people need to know, if we proceed without that knowledge, that they know we are proceeding without that knowledge. That we are actually going forward and voting on a deal where we've not seen significant side agreements that could affect our opinion about enforcement. In that sense, I think I don't see how anybody could say you're doing anything other than making sure the American people know before they leap, and making sure the administration knows before it leaps, and making sure our friends who probably have a different agreement than the three of us, or different opinion at this point than the three of us, that we want you to know every single thing there is to know. If you still think it's okay, fine, fair enough. Because you're right. I think people of good faith can disagree on this, but people of good faith would want everybody around the table to know everything before we cast a vote this consequential. And that, it seems to me, is what you're trying to do here. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, with that, I'll yield back. And I want to thank my friends on both sides, because I know they want to get this right, too. I actually do know my friends that will disagree with me on this vote, and I know it, and I respect them. But I want everybody to go into this with their eyes open as to every aspect of this deal. And I think what you're doing is trying to make sure that the administration knows, that the Congress knows, and most importantly, the American people know. And I think you're both to be commended for that. So thank you for your efforts. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma yields back his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And let me begin by saying I have great respect for Mr. Roscoe and Mr. Pompeo, and I respect their viewpoint. I have a very different viewpoint on this. I strongly favor the agreement, but what particularly frustrates me here today is the process. And we were here for 4 hours, as the ranking member said yesterday, to accomplish nothing. And we've been here, it seems like 4 hours already, and I don't know whether we're going to accomplish anything or whether there'll be another Rules Committee meeting tomorrow to have a different set of resolutions. But what really bothers me about this, and we all can agree that this is a serious issue, this kind of last-minute, introduction of language out of thin air, it really trivializes the process. And I think people who are watching this are kind of wondering, okay, well, like, why didn't you do this in July? Or better yet, why didn't you do it yesterday? Why wasn't this all dealt with yesterday? And I get it that there's internal struggles within the Republican conference. I mean, I used to, most days I'd like to see the Republican majority work in a bipartisan way. Doesn't happen very often. It certainly did not happen at all in what we're doing here tonight. But I think tonight, I wish you could find a way to work with each other so that we just don't spend all this time kind of wasting time, turning our wheels to pass rules that go nowhere. And, I get it. You're against the agreements, and all my colleagues here are against the agreements, and everyone here is going to try to, speak for, whatever time they have to justify, that why we're here tonight and saying this is a good thing. But I got to tell you that I just think for the process, for this institution, it'd be nice to be able to have the language on an important issue like this more than an hour before we meet in the Rules Committee, and certainly for members, more than the night before. If indeed this is this big issue that we all think it is, and I do think it is a big issue. I think denying Iran the ability to have a nuclear weapon is an important, policy matter that I feel strongly about. It is really, to me, sad, and this is not a reflection on you two, gentlemen, because I know you've been raising these issues for quite some time, but I just think this whole process is sad and embarrassing, and I think it demeans this institution to, at the last minute, after the majority in this committee not only reported out by a unanimous vote on the Republican side the rule yesterday, but all defended the process that brought us to yesterday, and all defended what we were going to bring to the floor in the debate, and that all just changed in a nanosecond. And so, look, we can sit here all night and make believe we're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we can question you about all the aspects of this agreement. But at the end of the day, I think everybody here ought to take a deep breath and reflect on how broken this process is. And to have it kind of fall apart on an issue this important, I think is really unfortunate. So we're going to take up a convoluted process with measures that won't go anywhere in the Senate and will never reach the President's desk. And you can say all you want that the agreement is not legitimate or doesn't really take effect on the 17th, but everybody else believes it will. Maybe these resolutions that you bring to the floor will be the basis for yet another lawsuit. But I mean, the Republicans are in charge of the House. The Republicans are in charge of the Senate. You run this place. Your party's in charge. And you have the responsibility to govern. And this is not a proper way to govern. And if anybody wants to defend it, they can go right ahead and do it, but I think it's indefensible. And again, this is not meant as a critique of what the two gentlemen who are here are trying to do. You know, you have your opinions, I have mine, but I think, you know, I think this whole House is broken down, and this is evidence of it. And as the ranking member said, I shudder to think what's going to happen when we start dealing with budget, you know, continuing resolutions and, you know, keeping the government running and all the other stuff that's going to come down the pike. And so I have no questions. I just want to get this over with, and let's go to the floor you know, and debate this, and people can vote their conscience. And I'm going to vote against what you're proposing because I think this is a good deal. I think it's a good deal for this country. I think it's a good deal for the world. And I will defend it on the House floor tomorrow. But with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much, gentleman from Georgia. Mr. Woodall is thanked for being here tonight. I know this is going on a long time, but I know these are important issues. Gentleman's recognized.
I'd say to our two witnesses, there have been several suggestions that what you all are doing here tonight trivializes this process. I reject that. I reject that wholeheartedly. And anyone who has been following your efforts, not just on the Iranian issue in particular, which have been long and well studied, but on national security issues in general, knows that you wouldn't be before us tonight on trivial issues. And I'm grateful for your leadership. I'm reminded, Mr. Roscom, that you filed your privileged resolution yesterday. While even as the Rules Committee was debating a path forward, you had an alternative path forward that you believed was important enough to file a privileged resolution that was going to bypass this Rules Committee to move forward on the floor because you thought it was that important to have this debate. Mr. McGovern suggests it is such a serious issue, again, that your actions trivialize it. And yet the headline I see is Harry Reid declares victory in Iran as he wins enough votes to support filibuster.
Will the gentleman yield for it?
Be happy
Yeah,
to
I didn't say that these two gentlemen trivialized the process. I said that this committee and this leadership trivialized the process. I want to be clear on that. I respect where they're coming from. I disagree with them. But I think what this Rules Committee did last night and the way this leadership has handled this issue and this last minute kind of, you know, here we had a whole new set of things to vote on tomorrow on an issue that my friends all say is the most important issue we're ever going to vote on. I think that does trivialize the process, and I think it's indefensible. That's what I meant. I didn't mean, I hope the gentleman didn't interpret that I was saying that your views on this trivialize the process. That's not what I meant.
I'm grateful to my friend for clarifying that. I think that's an important clarification. When the Senate may not even be able to go forward and have a debate on an issue as important as the one that you described for political reasons rather than policy reasons, I can understand why America may think this is a debate that is being trivialized. I would ask you both. The ranking member opened her comments by saying we're throwing together three bills that may as well have been scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. I would ask you both. We could have sorted this out yesterday. We could have sorted this out in July, though we didn't have all the information in July. Just out of curiosity, Mr. Pompeo, when did your concern about this issue and study on this issue begin? Was it this afternoon? Was it late last night? Was it a week ago yesterday?
So it was about 2 years ago. when the president made clear he was intent on doing this deal at almost any cost, when it became pretty clear that the president was in pursuit of a deal with the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and it became clear that we were going to at least concede before we got to the negotiating table with respect to enrichment. It was at that point I became very concerned that what we would get was ultimately bad. With respect to this particular issue, it began what would be some 72 hours after the deal was signed. It was when I traveled to the IAEA and learned from the deputy director of the existence of two agreements that confounded me, because I would have sworn I'd read the whole agreement before I got on that airplane. And maybe I should have read it in the agreement. Maybe I should have figured out there were a few words that might have keyed me to it, but I didn't. And I was literally sitting in a meeting with the IAEA when I was told, no, there's a couple agreements that you aren't going to be able to see. And I asked if anyone had seen it. There were State Department officials sitting in that room as well. And I was told by the deputy director of the IAEA, no American had seen or would have the opportunity to see those. And so that would have been the middle of July. Sometime, and I have been working hard at this issue, frankly, for the last 40 days to try and get my hands on those documents on behalf of the American people.
Mr. Roscom, I'm guessing you have a similar story. I listened to Mr. Pompeo. He's not talking about trying to derail U.S. foreign policy around the globe. He's talking about trying to get access to information to bring people together around U.S. foreign policy around the globe. Could you tell just a little bit of your story, 24-hour story, 72-hour story? How long?
Well, look, I mean, it is, it's no surprise that the level of concern that a number of us have about the decision by the administration to sit down with the Iranians, and as a precondition to sitting down, the Iranians are very good negotiators, and they essentially said, we're not going to meet with you unless we get $10 billion in sanctions relief. In my view, that was the prelude to a very bad negotiation, and it has become clear to me that the administration has essentially said, we're not going to leave here without a deal. And I think the Iranians have taken advantage of that. And so my interest in this particular issue has begun to ripen, actually, over a period of time when you begin to realize, oh, no, all the information hasn't been disclosed, and it's being now reported that this is all a fiat accompli. This is done, and that these sanctions are simply going to go away. I was asked by a reporter today who said, well, why didn't you think about it earlier? And I didn't have a defense. I didn't think about it earlier. But I do know that history is filled with people who ignore warning signs. And we have a warning sign. And the warning sign for us is unambiguous assertion on the part of the administration that they have complied with the law. That's in the congressional record right now. The administration is asserting that they've complied with the law. I reject that. I reject it based on the plain language of Corker-Cardin. I reject it because I think they've got access to information that they've not fully disclosed. And I think it is incumbent upon us to assert that, to make sure that if people decide to vote aye, they vote aye, eyes wide open, and with all the information that at their disposal.
I wish we were all here tonight speaking with one voice on U.S. foreign policy, but it is a great testament to you both that even with the very divergent views that we have on this panel, you've heard the attestation of respect, of trust, of admiration for the two of you and the way you conduct yourselves here. I thank you for that leadership, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I'll forego any questions.
So I'm just trying to understand this. So the side agreements with the International Atomic Energy Administration that you want us to see, we would see them in a classified room, or would they be public? Would they be made available on a classified basis to us or public?
Well, the Ayatollah has seen them, so I'm not clear to me why they would be U.S. classified.
So you believe that those should be declassified?
Well, I don't know what's in them, so it's difficult for me to scope them, but I do know that there are people without U.S. security clearances that have seen these documents.
And what is the legal significance of a sense of Congress, which is the type of resolution this is?
I think it makes clear as a legislative matter for this body that has its independent duty, regardless of what anyone else thinks, regardless of what the Senate concludes, regardless of what the State Department might conclude or the President concludes, that this institution, the People's House, does not believe that Corker-Cardin was complied with. What follows from that is statutory language that I think is pretty clear as well.
That's in one of these three proposals or separate statutory language?
Statutory language is contained in various sanctions provisions that have been passed into law over many years. Language in Corker-Cardin and certainly, I'm sorry.
Well, a sense of Congress, though, is it's not a law. It's a sense of the House of Representatives in this case, if it were to pass it.
That's right.
So I don't think it has any operative, as far as I can tell, it has no operative legal status if it were to pass. Is that correct?
Okay, could I?
Yes.
It's an assertion. It's an assertion by the House that's making a declaration, and it's an important declaration, particularly in light of the interaction that we had with Mr. Cole. If we don't assert this, then Corker-Cardin ticks. The clock is upon us. So the House needs to act affirmatively, Mr. Polis, in my view, to say we don't believe that Corker-Cardin has been satisfied, therefore we're not out of compliance, and we reserve the right to come back at a future date when the administration discloses this information to be able to say, all right, the clock ticks, the 60-day review period begins. So it's limited to the House, but it's not limited to the House. And it's an assertion that I would argue is important and, in fact, vital for the House to make.
I think, again, in your answer there, you said when the administration releases the information, but I think in the conversation with Mr. Cole, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like the White House claims they do not have this information to release. Is that, so are we calling upon the administration to release something that they don't have?
Well, we're calling upon the administration to release the side deals that are incumbent, that are inextricably linked to this deal. And if I could, I don't have it off the top of my head, and I regret it, but in a privilege resolution that I introduced, I went through chapter and verse a number of times that would supplement Mr. Hastings' claim. I get it. Look, if there's no legal access to this information, then what we would be proposing would be an absurdity. But that's not true. It's not absurd. And the reason it's not absurd is there's any number of times and any number of past IAEA officials that have said, as a matter of record, that this type of information is available. So to act as if this is attorney-client privilege between the IAEA and the Iranians, that this is somehow sacrosanct talisman that no one else can have access to, is ridiculous. And so what we're proposing is for the House to assert that and say, you don't get to say that we never get access to it. We're making the assertion as a matter of fact from the House that the date certain should not be triggered, and that is a declaration. So I would agree with you in part, but separate myself in part. I agree with you that it's limited to the House, so it's not a Senate action, nor are we contemplating that the President would sign off on this, obviously. It is a sense of the House. But the implication is not limited to the House.
Does a sense of the House even go to the President for a signature? So, again, it's an assertion, as you indicated, which is not related to a legal change. There is no then legal change in the status of the agreement or the sanctions. It's merely an assertion of the House, just like people can assert whatever they like, but it doesn't change the actual operative law. My next question is on the actual H.R. 3460. I noticed that there's a date that was chosen. It appears to be January 21st, 2017. I was wondering why that particular date was chosen, or what the significance of that date is.
It's through the end of the Obama administration.
So it's a deliberate attempt, it sounds like, to remove the ability of this particular president from waiving, suspending, reducing, or limiting the application of the sanctions. Is that correct?
That's right.
And why this particular president?
Because he's declared his intent to do so.
And there are various candidates, I believe, for president who've also declared their intent to follow this agreement, presumably in a similar way to President Obama. but this would not constrain them if they were elected president of the United States. Is that
Yeah, I mean, you
correct?
make a fair point. If I could do it into perpetuity, I would. I think then you're open to criticism that says, well, you're narrow and you're not willing for a new administration to come in and try anything. So in my view, the better course, and reasonable people can differ, but the better course is to say, since the President of the United States has declared his intention to do this, there's no ambiguity about what his view is. Let's limit that. Then Congress, the next Congress, can come in and have this same discussion and move forward.
And finally, the last bill is the, which is not your responsibility, but has been submitted. Is it correct, Mr. Chair? It's been submitted under Speaker Boehner's name as the lead sponsor, which is very rare, I believe, for a speaker to introduce a bill. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, the Speaker's bill is actually a bill to approve the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I don't think he necessarily intends to vote for his own bill, but he's introduced that bill. And now, as far as I can tell, this agreement has not been submitted for approval. So this is a necessary step. It seems like it's a step to replace a previous construct, which was a resolution of disapproval. So in the aggregate, my feeling is that we previously had a way that Congress could have voted to disapprove the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was a resolution of disapproval. Had that passed, it was likely to pass, and it might have passed the Senate as well. That would have gone to the President. The President could have vetoed it. This body would have had an opportunity to override that. It seems to me that you are replacing this with a weaker construct if you're an opponent of this effort, because the sense of the House is the sense of the House. There's no legal bearing. Suspending is temporarily, so clearly, if this were to become law and override the President, would remove until January 21st the ability of a President to implement this. But I would point out that, of course, many of the sanctions would not be relieved for at least 6 months anyway, so it does delay it somewhat. And then the approval is an affirmative approval that won't pass. So I mean, it seems to me you're replacing a absolute disapproval that would halt this agreement dead in its tracks with a temporary suspension of this president's ability to implement it. So how is this somehow consistent with your belief that this is a bad agreement when it seems like a weaker way to prevent this agreement from occurring?
It is a weaker way. I agree with your characterization. It is a weaker way, but we're left with no remedy if you believe that the administration has not been forthcoming in terms of full disclosure of the Iranian side deals with the IAEA. If, however, you reject that premise, then your characterization is correct. I don't reject the premise. I think that we now have no choice but to say, stop the clock, literally stop the clock. So then you have other members that say, well, look, if I'm not going to be allowed a roll call on showing my dissatisfaction or, your satisfaction with the underlying nuclear agreement, that's not particularly satisfactory. Not speaking for the Speaker, but my supposition is that he sought sort of an approach on that was somewhat satisfactory. But you're right, it's not as strong as an out-and-out disapproval resolution, but I would argue, just to repeat, that we had no choice based on the fact that we believe that Corker-Cardin is not invoked because the administration has not complied with it.
My final question is, so I believe that on balance, the IAEA is, the agreement is important. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, I believe, is a better alternative to the uncertainty that would arise otherwise. My question is, if you are able to gain access to these IAEA documents, either through this or through other means, would you then keep an open mind about supporting the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action based on the consideration of a thorough agreement between the IAEA and the Iranian administration?
You ask a great question. It's hard for me, Mr. Polis, to imagine something so compelling in the IAEA-Iranian negotiation that would overcome the burden of $150 billion in sanctions relief and the ability of the Iranians to use that to fund Hezbollah and Hamas with no restraint. That is an incredibly high burden. I've been surprised before, but I don't think I would be surprised enough to change my mind.
Mr. Pompeo?
I would say the same thing, and I just remind you, Mr. Pulse, this isn't about Mr. Roscom and me. This is about a legal requirement contained in Corker-Carden that is a statutory legal requirement that the documents be provided. And secondarily, there's an important element of allowing not just Mr. Roscom and me to see these side agreements, but allowing every American, and frankly, everyone in the world. We have P5+1 partners that ought to see these as well. As best I can tell, they've not seen them either. And so there's important duty that goes beyond just myself or Mr. Roscom getting a chance to.
Well, I would just say in closing, Mr. Chair, it does seem a little bit incongruous that these documents that you want access to, you feel will, in neither of your cases, be indicative to your decision-making process with regard to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And with that, I'll yield back.
Very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Mike Burgess, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. And it does seem like we've invested over the past 2 days a lot of time in this. And Mr. Roscom, I listened to your presentation on your privilege resolution yesterday, and I realize that's not the issue that's before the Rules Committee, but can you share with the committee, were you provided an answer to your question that you posed to the parliamentarian as to when the clocks, if Corker-Carden had been satisfied and the clock was started, I got the impression you felt that since all of the documents had not been supplied, the clock could not have started. Were you ever provided an answer to that?
No, Dr. Burgess, one of the shrouded mysteries of the House of Representatives at this point that I cannot discern is what the event was that started the clock and where that actually went down. So the State Department transmitted documents in which, and my memory serves, it was July 19th. And in those documents, the opening sentence from the State Department was, "This satisfies all of the requirements under the Review Act." And simply, it's an assertion by the State Department. Well, when you probe into that, and we've litigated this well today, you come to learn that didn't include the side deals, and that's why it became such a provocative thing. And I thought the better remedy was slow it down, and it could, we may all go to our graves not knowing how that exactly that clock started.
And yet it was a critically important point. So I thank you for bringing the privileged resolution to the floor yesterday. I think it did inform the process, and that's part of the reason that we're here tonight. But I've also heard the word process invoked several times. And I will say to you the same thing I said to Chairman Royce last night. I don't understand why we are here, because to me, this is plainly a treaty. It actually alters some existing treaties, so that reinforces the notion in my mind that this is a treaty. And if Article 2, Section 2, second paragraph, treaties are negotiated by the President and submitted to the Senate for advice and consent and 2/3 in concurrence before the treaty is adopted. And I realize it's a high bar, and I realize the administration did not want to be bothered with that, but you really come to understand the wisdom of the founders just because of what we're going through here this evening. This should be hard. This should be hard. And there was no reason to make it easy for the administration, for the State Department, for the House, for the Senate. This should be hard. And if we were serving our constituents right, it would be hard. So do either of you have any thoughts as to how we got to this point where we are not, why we're even considering this and why it is not being dealt with exclusively as a treaty by the Senate? I mean, after all, we don't want them raising taxes, right?
Well, I hate to speak for others, but I'll give you my observation. I voted against Corker-Carden as well on the belief that this should have been submitted as a treaty. It is momentous, it is broad, it is in the shape of the very type of agreement that have been submitted to treaties throughout American history. And by the way, many of those have been hard too. There's a long history of presidents submitting treaties to the Senate, having them rejected by the Senate, the president going back, renegotiating deals, and getting a better outcome for the United States of America. So it was possible that that could have been the course we went down. I think it became pretty clear that this president was not going to do that, and there was a hope that we could at least have some input. And so I think there were those folks who voted for Corker-Cardin judged that our alternatives weren't good, and that the option set was either have no input whatsoever or have the input that is provided under Corker-Cardin once the president presents the deal to us in its entirety, and they chose to support Corker-Cardin for that reason. I think many of them felt it should have been a treaty as well, but thought if we reject Corker-Cardin, we end up with nothing.
And yet, we are faced with that possibility in just a very short period of time. And let me just ask you, because, I mean, to me, the bottom line is, I want this thing stopped. I want it stopped dead in its tracks. I don't want Iran to get a nuclear device. So do you think with the 3 legislative directives we have in front of us, do we have an opportunity to stop this Iran deal from going forward? What part of it is what we're doing tonight that makes us, or puts us in a better position than where we were last night?
Yeah, I think, you want to go? No, I think several things. You ask a question, I suspect the president is going to proceed apace. I think that's the likely outcome. But it doesn't mean, A, we don't have a duty to get it right, enforce the laws as they exist today. I think this first resolution does that. I think the resolution telling the president that he's not permitted to lift sanctions furthers that understanding. I think that helps the American people understand where their elected officials stand as well, and I think that's the importance of the resolution that Mr. Boehner has introduced. And so I do think we can ultimately get to a place where the American people begin to engage more, and so it gives us hope that this president will either move more slowly or the next president will have the opportunity to begin to actually prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon rather than put them on a guaranteed pathway, as I think this deal does.
I guess one thing to think about is to think about the alternative, to think if we do nothing, to think if we're silent, and to think if we're complicit. What that does is that lays a foundation where the secret deals are not the subject of a lot of discussion. Right now, we're at a point where it looks as if a majority of the United States House of Representatives and a majority of the United States Senate and a majority of the American public are against this deal. And that in part is based on an incredibly robust discussion in this committee and among other people and all across the spectrum, but time has not been the friend of this deal. In other words, the more people learn, the more reluctant they become about it. So we're in the midst of a presidential campaign that is going to be game on and completely robust. Foreign policy is going to have an incredibly important role in the nature of the debate. Americans are going to be deciding who our next commander-in-chief is. And I think that this body can influence that. So we don't have the luxury of knowing exactly what the Senate's going to do. We don't have the luxury of all this certainty. But here's what we do know. We know what our responsibility is. And we've got the ability to raise to a level of understanding and consciousness and debate and to educate and to bring attention to things. And I think the work of this committee in particular, and I know it's a grind and God bless you, but the work of this committee and the work of other committees and the totality of this discussion is a good thing when it always comes down to it. This is not an easy responsibility that any of us have, but it's a good responsibility, and we know what our duty is, and I know that every member on this committee knows that.
Well, of course, you referenced the presidential campaign. One of the candidates on the West Lawn of the White House this afternoon characterized this deal as incompetent. I think he was perhaps being kind. I think it's aggressively incompetent. But I also reject the notion that we should be calling this a deal, because I said this last night to Mr. Royce, Chairman Royce. This is not a deal. This is a gift from the Obama administration to the mullahs in Iran. And I don't see that we can characterize it any other way. I thank you for your participation tonight. I know you've helped further the discussion, and I appreciate the passion that you bring to the debate. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman from Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the two gentlemen for being here and frankly for adding to this debate as we've gone through. I came into conference this morning thinking we knew where we were going, and they both brought up really good points that I think we needed to look at, and so did some other people. And I really appreciate their thoughtful approach at how we look at this. And, you know, to follow up on the discussion that you had earlier, I think it was with the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Pompeo, I just downloaded the whole Iran nuclear agreement, the base text, on the internet. It's public. Any member of the American public that wants to can download that part of the text. If these side agreements are going to be part of how we're going to implement the deal, don't they deserve that same kind of disclosure?
Yes, I think that they do. Right? I mean, they are a core component. They could as easily have been put in paragraph 19 as they were put into a separate side agreement, and I wish they had. We wouldn't be here debating tonight. We'd have the full text of the agreement in front of us.
It would be a lot simpler if we knew everything up front. And, you know, to the gentleman from Illinois, and I think you brought up a very relevant point, until we've actually seen the entire agreement, it's impossible for the clock to start. That's what the Corker law that we all, well, it's the law of the land, the president signed, it's what it says. We have to get the agreement. The agreement means the whole agreement. They could have just sent us page one and said, well, we sent you part of the agreement. As far as the base text too, I mean, you know, if it's part of how it's going to be implemented, it's part of the agreement. And so I appreciate the thoughtful approach, and I think we need to move forward, and I won't belabor this any longer, but thank you both for being engaged. And I know it's hard when you're not, you know, you guys are normally very much on the team, and so to stand up and say, I got a problem, took some fortitude, and I appreciate it. I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman yields back. It's time, gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Look, not to belabor this point, but Mr. Pompeo and I both have a similar attribute in this, that we both voted against Corker Carbon. We have had disagreements with this issue before, and I know that it may sit not well with many. I think we missed the boat, frankly, when we left sanctions. I think that we should have kept the sanctions going. I think that should have kept. We had actually a regime change in Iran who actually wanted to come forward. The reason the regime change came was simply the fact that they wanted to relieve the burdensome international sanctions that were on board. I think leaving that was a mistake. I think the minute we changed from the end of last year, when it was a bill to strengthen Iran sanctions and we went to a bill to appease, frankly, this administration, I think that was a mistake. It was a mistake for not only the Middle East, it was a mistake for the world, and it was a mistake for the United States. And as one who has been in that area in a hostile environment, I think this is frankly a mistake. So frankly, it is a concern to me that we are, dealing with this in the way that we're dealing with it, but I do appreciate what you have brought forward. You have brought forward many concerns, and I think it is helpful to that discussion. And for me, and I know Mr. Pompeo, this was not a way that we ever saw this coming down, because we feel frankly betrayed that the best interest of the United States and not only the world was taken into account here, and that this agreement is a bad agreement. I think sanctions should have been concluded and continued, and that we could have worked something out. So at this point, this is an agreement I think we can work forward with. I appreciate the gentleman for bringing this forward. And I know especially from Mr. Pompeo and I's standpoint, this was never an agreement we worked toward to start with. So as we work forward to that, I appreciate him being here. I appreciate Mr. Roscom being here, who has always been a leader, and I do appreciate that very much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will move on and let others speak.
Mr. Collins, thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Alabama, the gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman, Mr. Newhouse, who was in the paper today and looked really awesome, we enjoyed seeing your regular duties as you go back home. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In some respects, I kind of wish I was there right now, but.
The old saying goes, dream on, brother.
Well, it's been a long night, and I don't want to break our record from last night. We went 3 hours, I think it was, just a hair over 3 hours, but we're headed there. But there is one question that occurs to me. There's been reference of these, especially in light of these side agreements, that first of all, members of the administration, negotiating team hadn't seen them, then they were aware of them, and I can't remember the exact words, had been briefed on them by somebody. And then I think, Mr. Pompeo, you mentioned that in a conversation with some of the IAEA people that no American has seen them. I guess what I would like to know, who has seen them? Somebody conducted the briefings to members of a negotiating team staff that they must have, someone must have knowledge as privileged information. Are other members of the P5+1, are they have access to these agreements? Is it just between Iran and the IAEA? Is it something that we can get access to? Is there privileged information there that's not available to the U.S. Congress? Who does have this information?
I can only give you my understanding. My understanding is that the only parties that have seen the final versions of these documents are those persons who work for the IAEA and the leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And we have no idea, perhaps, of the content of those, although it seems as though one news organization reported on the possible content of one of them. Do we have any knowledge as to the nature of the agreements? If they're just like 180 other countries in some respects, do we have any general idea what these agreements contain?
So I think many members of Congress have been briefed on the subject matter, the scope of them. That is, we know that one of the two agreements has to do with the work that the IAEA is doing and has been trying to do for literally a decade about the history of the Iranian militarization of their nuclear program, and then the second side agreement has to do with the verification regime for the activities that have taken place and may well still be taking place at a facility located in Parchin.
But specifics we're short on. Yeah. Correct. Well, that's the curiosity that comes to my mind is we could be part of that exclusive club. It would be great, and appreciate your efforts on trying to bring this information to light. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of my question. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newhouse. I want to thank our witnesses for coming forth with what I think was a first visit. You did pretty well, Peter. You did well enough to get invited back.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Pompeo, it's good to see you too. If you'll please make sure that you leave for our awesome stenographer anything that you brought in writing tonight. This committee is going to take about a 10-minute recess. We'll call it a break. We'd ask members probably not to leave the floor. And we're going to, yeah, bathroom break, I could say that out loud too. But I want to thank both of you for being here. And so the committee for approximately 10 minutes will be in recess subject to the call of the chair. Peter. Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for the quick change of pace here. Chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman, grandfather of the community, North Carolina, Vice Chairman of the community, Ms. Fox.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.Res. 411, finding that the President has not complied with Section 2 of the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015 to close the rule. The rule provides 2 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the minority leader or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. The rule provides the resolution shall be considered as read and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 3461 to approve the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action signed at Vienna on July 14, 2015, relating to the nuclear program of Iran under a closed rule. The rule provides 3 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the minority leader or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 3 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 3460 to suspend until January 21, 2017, the authority of the President to waive, suspend, and reduce, provide relief from, or otherwise limit the application of sanctions pursuant to an agreement related to the nuclear program of Iran under a closed rule. The rule provides 2 hours of debate with 30 minutes controlled by the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or his designee, 30 minutes controlled by the chair of the Committee on Ways and Means or his designee, and 1 hour controlled by the minority leader or her designee. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Finally, Section 4 of the rule provides that H.Res. 408 shall be laid on the table.
Chairman thanks the gentlewoman for her motion. I'd like to defer to myself for a brief explanation of the rule. This rule provides for each of these measures under closed rules so that we can have a clear up or down vote. In total, there are 7 hours of debate on the 3 measures. At the request of the minority, the rule takes the unusual step of giving all of the minority debate time to the minority leader rather than the committees. I hope that the ranking member can assure us that the Democrats who support these measures will also be recognized. Lastly, the rule tables House Resolution 408, which provides for consideration of the resolution of disapproval. Is there further amendment or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule.
The gentleman's recognized.
I move to strike Section 4 of the rule. Section 4 would table the rule that we adopted last night that provides for the disapproval of this deal. As you know, we have one bill in this rule that provides for the approval, and I believe it would be wise for us to maintain the option of disapproval as it would be in keeping with the Corker-Cochran bill we've heard so much about. So it would be my motion that we strike Section 4 of the rule.
You now heard the motion. Is there further discussion?
Yes. You're keeping both, you're going to pass a rule here tonight, but you're going to keep the rule that we passed last night? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
That's absolutely so astonishing. I scarcely know what to say. What are you going to do tomorrow? Pick out which one you want?
We want to keep our options open.
I don't believe I've ever seen in my time here that we went to the floor with 2 rules on a measure that you choose whichever one you please when the time comes up. Is that what's happening here?
Would the gentleman yield?
Absolutely.
I'm afraid that folks have misunderstood your amendment because there's only one rule for each measure we're talking about. We've got one rule for.
No, I'm sorry. I think you might have misunderstood me. I'm talking about the fact that we're preserving the rule that we did last night, as well as passing a rule tonight. So there will be 2 rules.
There will
Right?
be 2 rules.
2 rules. And you don't find that unusual?
I would have said we often meet and report 2 rules in the same meeting. What's unusual is we've reported 2 rules in
On
two
the
different.
same issue?
2 different.
No, come on.
Well, but
Come on.
We're separate,
That's
we're separate
elementary.
issues, but I
You're
thank the gentleman for
passing 2
yielding.
rules on the same issue. You want to go either way on that? I never heard of that in my life. I should, like Alice in Wonderland, as I always say in here, I have learned to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast in order to be on the Rules Committee, but good Lord, we can't, that's appalling.
Well, how we
I
vote,
don't know how you guys can do that with a straight face.
Mr. Chair.
Is there?
just did it.
Let me yield to Mr. McGovern.
No, I
yield to
just have a question. Given the, I mean, I think we've only adjourned for like 10 minutes. And I guess the question, and you're in charge and you wrote the rule, like, I'm assuming you're all going to vote for Mr. Burns' rule. Why didn't you just write the rule minus
yeah,
this?
why'd
Why are
you
we going
strike
through, why are we going through this? Is this to show some independence, or what's the message here that we're trying to, I mean, I just.
Mr. McGovern,
It just seems to me it would have been easier for you just to draft the rule the right way the first time. But anyway,
my message is simple.
Yeah.
I think that we should preserve the option to vote on a bill or joint resolution that's in keeping with the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015 that disapproves the deal.
Right.
That's all this does.
And-
That's-
and no,
I'm
and-
saying
and
that
no,
with a
and no.
straight face, because that's what
No,
I'm.
and
That's not all
look,
it
and you could do whatever you want. You guys are in charge. I just was curious, you could have saved a little bit of time if you just, given the fact you're all going to vote for your rule, your amendment, that, why you just didn't write the rule the way you wanted to begin with. But anyway, you guys are in charge, and you
Yeah,
get
and,
some,
Mr. Polis, you want to speak on this? Let me yield to Mr.
Yeah, I did a question
You have-
about it, if you know. So what is the substantive image for the chairman? What is the difference between the HR 3461 to approve it and disapprove it? Or would we be voting both to
gonna-
approve and to disapprove,
No,
both
we're
of them
going to
under this
choose
amendment?
one tomorrow, apparently. They're going to do 2 rules on that issue.
Okay, so,
We've never done that.
but we won't actually do both of those votes.
We don't know.
Well,
Mr. Chairman?
I don't know.
So I guess that's my question for the chair. Are we,
is this a question
the question is, yeah, is it to preserve the option to do one of those 2 things, approve or disapprove, or is it an attempt to do both of those things, both of those votes?
Yeah, we would ask the gentleman, it's his amendment, but in my opinion, what this would be to reserve an option that would be available at the time we go to the rule tomorrow.
And if I could ask the gentleman, is that your intention, or is it your intention to vote both on approval and disapproval?
It's my intention to preserve the option to do either.
Either.
No, let me be very clear. When I say either, I mean you could do one or the other or both.
And who will make that decision?
I don't get to make those decisions.
I would
Well-
say that I intend to announce that I would be handling the rule on the floor and that I would call that up.
I still have a little time here, but who's going to make that decision
Me.
as to which one we're going to do? And you couldn't possibly do 2 rules on the same issue.
No, we're not.
Well,
I do
then you're
not
going-
think
one
that's
is
the
going to be
intent.
chosen.
I
Is
think
that right?
I think that the decision.
We will do 1 rule.
We will do 1 rule.
All right.
Right,
But just a second, I want to make sure we understand this. You are preserving, we're going to vote on a rule, and you're going to keep the rule from last night.
We're going to reserve, if we agree to his
And of course you
amendment.
will.
Well, I probably plan to support it.
Yeah, I
In
think
fact,
so.
I do.
Okay, but that's here, that's a given. I think we would like to know exactly who's going to make this decision, at what time are we going to do that? And frankly, does that comport with the rules of the House? Can you do that? Can you have 2 rules for 1 issue?
Mr.
on
Chairman,
the
may I
same day?
speak?
Mr. Chairman?
I know you can have 2 rules in 1 day. I'm not asking that. Can you have 2 rules for 1 bill?
Mr. Chairman? No,
It's 2 rules.
no, Mr.
We're
Chairman,
going to vote a rule tonight.
would the gentlewoman, would the gentlewoman yield?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the gentlewoman from New York is confusing the issue a little bit. We don't have 2 rules for the same issue. These are 2 distinct rules. There was a rule passed yesterday for a totally different bill. This rule is for 3 bills. We routinely.
However, well, let me reclaim my time, because let's leave it right where you said that. What you are doing is preserving both of those rules on one issue.
But we
How can you do
routinely do that.
No, we don't.
We absolutely do. We come up here and we pass rules, and then we return here and pass another rule on another bill. We've done it many times, and we don't normally have in the rule, the subsequent rule, say anything about tabling the previous rule.
Look,
We do it
I don't
routinely.
even like the notion that you do 3 bills under one rule. But now what we're doing is doing 2 rules in one bill. I mean, I'm absolutely, yes, but let me yield to Mr. Hastings. Yes.
When we have done what Dr. Fox said, we have not laid a matter on the table.
No.
And therein lies the precedent setting.
What we're doing is having 2 rules, and they're going to choose one.
Exactly.
They're keeping an option.
And then.
I don't think the rules of the House will allow that.
If you would continue to yield, then I would ask the chair to take into consideration that we are also dealing with a membership that may very well be substantially confused in light of the fact that what time are we going to proceed tomorrow? If we do so routinely, then members just simply won't know what's going on. It's very confusing.
Well, gentlemen, yield.
Of course.
How is this, Frank, and I'll yield to Mr. Burns, but how is this confusing when we're dealing with one bill that was separate from last night that we dealt with, and we're dealing with another issue tonight on separate issues? I mean, I understand and I would be under the same vein if I was in a minority in this situation, but this is not real confusing. This is an issue that preserves a bill that we dealt with last night, but at the same point, we're moving forward with the bills that we have dealt with tonight. And I'll yield to Mr. Burns to finish this thought.
Well, I still have time, if I may.
Well, at this point in time, he yielded to
She
me.
yielded to me.
And I understand, but he yielded to me.
When you're through,
The idea of going to the floor tomorrow, not knowing which rule we're going to go on.
How are you understanding this is not a
And not telling the members
rule?
of the House of Representatives what rule we are going to the floor under is legislative malpractice.
may I speak, Mr. Chairman? If the gentlewoman's finished?
I'd be happy to yield to you, Mr. Burns.
Thank you, ma'am. We're not going with 2 rules on the same bill. We have a rule that we adopted last night on one bill, and we have a rule before this body tonight on 3 other bills. Now, one of the bills in the rule we have tonight is similar, but not the same as the bill that we made in order last night.
It's totally different.
Is totally different, and that's why you can have a rule like we had last night that has a bill that's totally different from one of the bills that we have tonight, and have a separate rule on that bill, because they're actually substantively different bills. They could have substantively different effects as a matter of law, so it is appropriate for there to be separate rules for those 2 bills.
But, Mr. Byrne, one of those rules tomorrow has to be used to vote on that approval or disapproval, correct?
There could be a vote
It
on...
could either be last night or whatever we're going to do tonight, or maybe we're not going to do a rule on it.
You asked me if it was correct. The correct answer is you could have a vote on both of them because they're 2 separate bills that do 2 separate things. They may be similar, but they do 2 separate things.
Will the gentleman yield to me for one?
I'd like to take just a second, if I can, to offer some bit of hopeful clarification.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yes, indeed, I yield to you.
'Cause I think you're asking good questions.
Oh, thank you for that. Let's,
The-
I'm
the-
stunned.
Well,
I don't,
You'll get over that.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I think this may be, we may have reached a new low here
The
tonight.
opportunity for the Rules
I
Committee
absolutely
to come
think
and
so.
report out rules is not an unusual circumstance. Matter of fact, I consider it quite regular. In that process, it is also.
You table the bill the last
also-
night because
well,
we're meeting tonight because you changed what we
It
did.
is also quite reasonable to expect that I'm sure that the majority leader would make an announcement that I'm sure that the minority whip, if that is Mr. Hoyer's correct title, that the minority whip, they would engage each other on the floor, and the majority leader would make an announcement at the appropriate time, that he would anticipate that this is the schedule that we would follow, and the majority leader would make that announcement.
Just so we're really clear.
Which happens every single week.
Right, but, so the rule that we will take up tomorrow at 12:15 is the rule that includes the 3 bills. Am I right? Or we don't know?
I would anticipate that would be a true
And so,
statement.
what we're doing is going through a little kind of theatrics here to preserve the rule that we passed last night, knowing that the Senate's not going to take up any of these 3 bills. And so we're going through a meaningless exercise to begin with, because on this issue, quite frankly, we already know that the president has prevailed. So we're going to, so
would the gentleman yield on that?
you'll vote on the Senate, you'll vote on what the Senate's going to vote on is the disapproval either Friday or next week.
Well, let's let's look at it this way a minute. Now, maybe you really hit on something here, Jim. Maybe we're going to vote on both.
Right.
And the Senate is taking up disapproval, so you will just then discard what you did on the approval, and they will do something, and you will try to have some semblance here of trying to work
face.
together.
And
Save
maybe
face or
if the
whatever it
gentlewoman
is
would
going to be
yield,
done. I will.
And maybe what would happen is we might figure out overnight more carefully a process that the Senate would adapt or adopt themselves to be amenable to taking the legislation.
Mr. Chairman.
So maybe
There
it's
you are.
not as unusual or odd.
Yeah, it
as
is.
one might
It's
assume.
unusual.
Well, Chairman, we're not deeming it.
Because what that means is that we've been sitting here tonight doing all this stuff for absolutely nothing.
Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that's her.
I control time.
First, whatever you're considering overnight, I gather would be here at the Capitol. Tortilla closes at a certain hour.
Well,
I just want to make, that's inside
Well, Mr. Chairman,
baseball, you all.
Mr. Chairman, I want to say something.
Yeah, but I'm not finished.
Then I'll yield, if you'll yield.
I asked the chairman about 2 yield, and I had asked the chairman earlier about the uselessness of this in light of what the Senate is doing. And I asked the chairman a question as to whether or not the Senate had achieved unanimous consent. The information that I have now is that cloture was filed on the Iran agreement. And this evening, Senator McConnell filed cloture on the McConnell substitute and on H.Res 61, which was ours, the legislative vehicle for congressional disapproval. And Senator McConnell has indicated that he would go forward and seek consent to proceed with their vote on Friday. So the other thing I want to address is Mr. Byrne, when put the question by Mr. Polis, and I was asking the same question as to who would make the decision. Mr. Byrne is the maker of the motion and didn't know at the time who would make the ultimate decision.
I think he said
And then, Chair, you chimed in and said that you were going to make the decision.
I would anticipate that who announces it might be the majority leader, and we will come to some conclusion therein after studying the things which you have.
Well, you all give fluidity new meaning.
Well.
Because, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And creativity as well.
Does the gentlewoman seek further time?
No, thank you. I yield.
Gentlewoman does not. Does the gentleman from Colorado seek time?
I do want to,
recognized.
the chair might be, and others might be wondering who is here. I thought it was fairly safe that the committee would be done by their work by 9:30, so I'd arranged to take some folks on a tour. Instead, they're getting to see our democracy in action, which would be wonderful. Subsequently, we will enjoy the tour. Appreciate all the comments. I should know never to guess the schedule of the Rules Committee. That's one of the great privileges of being on this committee, is to maintain our flexibility. And I would further add that I would trust the discretion of the chair more than the discretion of the majority leader with regard to which rule we take up, and I hope that you make an informed decision. These are actually these are job creators from Southern California who are with us today, learning about our process up close here in Washington, and businessmen and women who want to learn a little bit more about what we do here in the Washington, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I hope, Mr. Chair, that you make a well-informed decision with regard to whether we indeed vote on approval or disapproval tomorrow.
I appreciate that very much. But by the way, for our friends who are here from California, welcome to the Rules Committee.
Yeah.
And thank you for being job creators.
Amen. Mr. Chairman.
If I could indulge us just a minute, because we're in the middle of a family fight here, which is always fine. That is.
We're in the middle of a family fight in the Rules Committee about a family fight in your committee.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're the Addams family. Yeah.
What I wanted to say is, as you lean forward to view this committee, I'd also like for you to lean back and look at the beautiful young woman who is there with her hands up on her coat, and that is Louise Slaughter, who is before you here in better days.
Well,
It used to be fun when it used to be fun. And so I really want to welcome each of you to the Rules Committee. The gentleman,
Mr. Chairman.
seek time, gentleman's recognized.
And I appreciate that, and I do appreciate Ms. Slaughter, and I think we'll just have a healthy disagreement that those were, you know, frankly, from our side, not better times, because there were closed rules, there were issues of deeming past and everything else. I think the issue here is simply preserving a rule that we passed last night, and this issue about the Senate, whether they take it up or not, we're the House. I frankly don't care if the Senate takes, you know, it up, doesn't take it up, nap time, whatever they want to do in the Senate. That's not my problem. We need to do what's best for the House, and when we understand that, that's what Mr. Burns' amendment is simply saying, is keeping that option open. The Senate takes it up or not. If the Senate wants to go down a path of putting this country in jeopardy and the Middle East in jeopardy, and they don't want to take it up, that's on them. This is a bad deal. I didn't vote for Corker-Cardin. I did not come to this point because I believe we made a tragic mistake as a country when we left the idea of sanctions. And that may be disagreed by members of the other party and disagreements on the other part of this aisle. And that's what's good to see about this. But the problem is when you had a country that was under a sanctions and made regime change and made other points to change to get out from under the sanctions, that told me sanctions were working. And to go at a different route to get to the result that we have, in which for someone who has served in Iraq, in which we relieve the conventional weapons sanctions and we relieve ICBM sanctions in 5 to 8 years, this is a bad deal. So sanctions,
I thank the gentleman.
Would not voting to disapprove, would you had that option on the measure that we passed last night?
I think at this point we're voting either way. I'm just simply saying the Senate is relevant. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. For our friends that are here, we've been after this for about 4 hours, and we have way too much fun doing this. I do appreciate the gentleman's dialogue. Does the gentleman wish to continue the dialogue? Thank you very much. We're going to end discussion. We're now going to vote on the gentleman from Alabama's motion, his amendment. Those in favor of the Byrne Amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Byrne Amendment passes. Byrne Amendment passes. Gentlewoman from New York asks for a roll call vote. Clerk
Ms. Fox.
Poll.
Aye. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers. Aye. Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins. Aye. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne. Aye. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter. No. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The amendment is agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
Poll committee.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Aye. Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter? No. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye. Clerk report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and I will be handling this for Republicans. Mrs. Slaughter will be handling that for Democrats. I want to thank everybody for their time, and most assuredly to offer admiration to each of you who are visiting Washington, D.C. Mr. Polis, thank you so much for bringing so many wonderful people in, and the committee has done its work for the evening, and thank you very much, and good luck. God bless you.